All right. Good evening, friends. I'm Ron Williams. And tonight we're going to be talking about something that almost everybody in recovery struggles with. And that is the idea of forgiving yourself without excusing your past and the harm that you caused. So, before I get started on that, I want to take just a minute and kind of remind you that we're doing this live event tonight. While you're here, everybody, I would appreciate it when you jump in, check in the chat, and let me know where you're joining us from. And at the end of the event tonight, if something has been said that's been beneficial for you, think about sharing this with somebody that could benefit from hearing what we've discussed this evening. This live event will be up on my Facebook page for 30 days, but by this time tomorrow, this video will be posted on my YouTube channel, RW Coaching. And so feel free to share the video here on Facebook or on YouTube with somebody that might benefit from something that we talk about today. Now, let me start by saying, first of all, I don't really like the phrase self-forgiveness. Not because the idea is wrong, but because I think most people misunderstand or don't have a clear understanding of what self-forgiveness really is and what we're talking about. When people say, I can't forgive myself, what they're actually saying is, I'm drowning in shame. It doesn't really have anything to do with a lack of forgiveness. It has to do with being overwhelmed by a sense of shame. Tonight, what we're going to do is we're going to separate those two things so that you can move forward with truth, with responsibility, and with hope. Now, again, if you're watching live, let me know where you're joining from. And feel free to jump into the comments anytime with any questions, any comments on anything that is shared this evening. So, let's begin by getting a new definition of self-forgiveness, because I believe that language matters. And here's the thing with self-forgiveness. Self-forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. It doesn't rewrite history. When we do things, when we cause harm, when we cause hurt to someone else, when we do things that are wrong, that are possibly illegal, there are consequences to our behavior. There are consequences to our actions, and we need to understand that. Self-forgiveness doesn't rewrite history, and it definitely doesn't take away the harm that we've caused to other people. Now, what self-forgiveness does do is self-forgiveness will pull us out of the shame that's keeping us stuck. And that's what we want. We want to be able to break free from that shame so that we can move forward into a new and different life. So what does shame do to us? Shame freezes us. It locks us into a state where we believe that change can never take place. Shame isolates us. When we experience shame, when we feel shame, we withdraw and we shut down to other people. We don't want to be around other people. Shame convinces us that we don't deserve healing. But responsibility, on the other hand, when we're able to take responsibility for our actions, responsibility frees us to be able to grow. Responsibility frees us to tell the truth. Responsibility gives us the ability to say, yes, I did this, and yes, I'm choosing to live differently now. I'm choosing not to do that thing again, not to cause that harm again. So, forgiving ourselves is not removing responsibility. Forgiving ourselves is creating enough safety inside myself to be able to take responsibility and to move forward. Now, I want to slow down for a minute and draw a line, a clear line between three things. All right. The first thing that I want to touch on is that idea of shame. Shame tells me I am a bad person. Shame tells me that I'm broken, that I'm wrong, that I can't be better, I can't do better, I cannot change. That is shame. The second thing is guilt. Guilt says I did something wrong. Guilt really has a layer of truth to it. I did something wrong. I caused harm. I broke trust. I did something wrong. And then this third point is responsibility. When we enter into responsibility, in responsibility, we are able to say, I can respond now in a healthy way to the harm that I've caused, to the things that I have done wrong. Now, a lot of people confuse shame with accountability. For instance, somebody might think that if I hate myself enough, if I talk badly about myself enough, that is the same as taking responsibility. But it's not. It's not at all. It's shame. And it locks us into a state where we can't change because we don't believe that change is possible. Shame has never helped anyone to grow. Never. You know, there was a verse that I came across in the Bible while I was in jail years ago, 15 years ago or so, 15, 16 years ago. There was a verse, Romans 2:4. Some of you have heard me quote this before, and I'm going to throw it out there again. Romans 2:4 says, do you not understand that it's the kindness of God that leads to repentance? What most of us believe, what I told myself for the majority of my life, is that shame leads to change. But shame never leads to long-term change. It's kindness. It's recognizing the kindness of God. It's being able to demonstrate kindness towards myself. That allows me to break free and to change. Shame sabotages recovery. We will never live in shame and experience a changed life. Not in the long term. It'll never happen. Guilt, on the other hand, can be a healthy thing. Guilt allows me to tell the truth about myself. It allows me to own my behavior. Guilt invites me to ask three questions. Have I violated my morals? Have I violated God's morals? Or have I caused harm in some way? Guilt allows me to begin to move towards responsibility. And responsibility is powerful because responsibility creates change. So forgiving myself means being able to move from shame, that idea that I'm broken, that nothing's ever going to change, I'm never going to be free, I'm never going to be different. Forgiving myself means moving from shame to guilt, where I am able to accept and admit that I've caused harm, that I've violated moral standards. And as I experience guilt and respond to it in a healthy way, I'm able to step into responsibility, which brings about change and brings about growth. So, what we're talking about tonight is forgiving ourselves without excusing our past. Now, I'll be honest with you, for the majority of my life, I was all about excuses. I was all about excusing the past. The idea that, well, I've decided that I'm going to change, so everybody else just needs to accept that that's taking place. But excuses are an attempt to avoid dealing with the guilt and taking responsibility. What we're trying to do there with excuses is we are trying to avoid the hard work of making things right. And we're trying to excuse our past behavior. You're right, Blast. You recognize that cup, dude. You bought that for me, man. Thank you. So, with excuses, we're trying to avoid the hard work and we're trying to excuse past behavior. So, we'll do that with statements a lot of times. We will make statements like, well, I only did that because I was stressed. I only did that because I was lonely. I only did that because I was hurting or because I didn't know better. Or, I did that because my marriage was bad. What we're saying with a lot of those statements is, I'm not going to take responsibility. And a lot of times what we're trying to do is shift that responsibility from myself to somebody else. I didn't have the tools that I needed. Now, some of those statements may be true. Maybe I had a bad marriage. Maybe I really didn't know that I was hurting anybody. Maybe I was in pain. But that doesn't give me an excuse to cause harm. That doesn't give me an excuse to do what I know to be wrong. It doesn't excuse behavior. And attempting to excuse the past prevents healing. When all we're attempting to do is to excuse our behavior, that behavior will never change. When we're able to step up and own the past, owning the past invites transformation. We have to be willing to admit that what we did was wrong, that what we did caused harm. And if we can't admit that, if we can't own that, The only person that we're lying to is ourselves. The people around us see the truth and they know the truth. The only person that we fool, the only person that I fool is me. So, what does forgiving yourself actually look like? And again, remember, when we talk about forgiving ourselves, we're not really talking about forgiveness. We're talking about dealing with shame. So here's a healthier, more truthful picture of self-forgiveness. Self-forgiveness is the ability to tell the truth about your past, to feel the weight of it, to acknowledge the harm, the pain, the damage that you caused, to take responsibility for that harm, but to refuse to drown in the shame that can come from that. Now, what I'm talking about is not denial. It's not pretending that what we did wasn't serious or wasn't harmful. It's not demanding that everybody else just move on and get over it. That used to be a favorite phrase of mine. You need to just move on and get over it. You know, it's done and over with. You just got to get over it. That is not self-forgiveness. That's an excuse. Self-forgiveness is something that happens inside of me. It's about releasing the belief that I'm unforgivable so that I can actually become the kind of person who is safe, who is honest, and who is responsible. Now, I want to comment there for a minute, because as we move forward, as we learn to practice self-forgiveness, to set aside that shame, to respond in a healthy way to the guilt, to take responsibility and to move forward and change, we will begin to become a safer, more honest, more responsible person. But what I can have a tendency to do in that is to expect everybody to immediately respond and accept me as a more safe, honest, and responsible person. But the truth is, what they've experienced from me is not those things. For the majority of my life, especially while I was living in active addiction, I was not a safe person. I was not an honest person. I was not responsible. And for me to expect people to accept that I have changed and to begin to treat me as if I've changed, to expect that to happen quickly, it's an unrealistic expectation, and we're setting ourselves up for problems. It's just not going to happen, not in a quick way. Even though the change may be taking place in me, it takes time for the people around me to see that change and to accept that that's what's happening. So, what I want to present here for a minute is a 4-step framework. And that framework is this. We step out of shame. We begin to speak the truth. We take responsibility, and we make repair. All right, simple framework. So let's start with number 1. We step out of shame. Shame always blocks honesty. When I feel like I'm hopeless, and shame puts us in a place of hopelessness, Nothing's ever going to change. I'm never going to be free. Maybe you've heard people say things like that. I'm just broken. I'm just messed up. I can't do any better. I'm never going to be free from this addiction. Have you ever heard anybody say that? Have you ever said that? That's shame. And shame blocks honesty. It blocks our ability to be honest. Shame shuts down our nervous system. It locks us up emotionally. And shame convinces us that growth is impossible. It just can't happen. I'm never going to be better. Nothing is ever going to change. Before we're able to change, we have to be able to get out of shame, to step out of shame long enough to take a breath, long enough to steady ourselves so that we can recognize the truth. We're not hopeless. We're not broken. We can change. And if you're here listening to me today, you need to hear that. And you need to begin to learn and to know that that's a true statement. You can change. You can experience freedom. Some of you here beat yourself up. Something happens, you slip up. Things don't go exactly as you had planned. And you beat yourself up and you scream in the mirror. You're never going to change. You're never going to beat this. But I would challenge you. Look back on where you've been. I can just about guarantee that every one of you have made some progress. If you have made an attempt at recovery, you have made some kind of progress. And we have to be able to step out of that shame. Step 2 in our process, tell the truth without minimizing. I used to tell myself that I was an honest person and that I was being truthful, when in fact, I would share a little bit of the truth, but I would minimize so much of what had taken place. We need to step up, be able to be open and honest, tell the truth without minimizing. We need to name what happened. We need to be forthcoming with what we've done, with what our behavior, what our action was. And we need to be able to say that plainly. We need to say it clearly. No softening, no justifying, no using the word but. Well, I did do that, but. Remember those statements I listed earlier? But I didn't know better. But, I was feeling lonely. But my marriage wasn't going well. Excuses. Say it plainly. No justifying, no softening. Honesty has to be the foundation of all healing. If we can't be honest with ourselves, we will not experience healing in our life and in our recovery. Step 3, take responsibility fully. Full responsibility for what we've done, for the harm we've caused. Now, responsibility doesn't mean that we beat ourselves up. Responsibility isn't self-hatred. Responsibility is owning the choices that we made and owning the impact that those choices and those behaviors had on people. Responsibility says, I caused harm and I will not repeat it. I'll do everything I can to see to it that I don't do that again. And then step 4 is repair. We repair what we can and we live differently moving forward. So, what does repair look like? Repair might include things like making amends. Now, some of us have a screwed up concept of what amends means. To make amends means that we take responsibility for the harm that we've caused, and we actively work to repair it as much as possible and as much as is appropriate. Amends is, I want to say always, I will say for sure almost always, but I want to say always, amends is more than just saying, I'm sorry. It's about aligning my words with actions and aligning future behavior with truth. We make amends. It will look like repair might include changing patterns. What are we talking about with patterns? Well, I'll tell you a pattern that I had to come to grips with and I had to begin to work on to change. I would never have been able to experience long-term recovery without changing this pattern. And it had to do with being able to tell the truth. For most of my life, when anybody asked me a question, hey, Ron, did you do this? It didn't matter what the question was. The place that my brain immediately went to when I heard a question had nothing to do with the truth, had nothing to do with truth being in any way aligned with what I was saying. When somebody asked a question, my brain immediately went to, what do I need to say to make them happy? What do I need to say to not get in trouble? That's where my brain went. No concept of what was true, no thought to what was true. What do I need to do to get a good response here? And so changing that pattern. I would never have been able to move forward in recovery had I not been able to recognize that pattern and begin to change it. Repair might include building accountability. One of the things that I've found is that when I intend to make a change, if I tell somebody, I'm a lot more likely to follow through and do it. Because I know somebody's going to check up, somebody's going to ask me about it. Repair might include doing the internal work, not just saying I'm going to change, doing internal work, study, reading, going to meetings, meeting with a sponsor. It means repair might mean learning emotional regulation. I knew very little about emotional regulation. I think most people know very little about emotional regulation. What we know about is running from emotions. We know how to suppress emotions and how to hide from them, how to ignore them. Learning how to regulate emotions. When I get angry, what do I do to calm myself and to self-regulate? How do I do that? There are techniques and there are tools, but it takes action on our part. Making a repair will probably mean that we become somebody who's trustworthy. somebody who says what we mean and mean what we say. This is where true self-forgiveness grows. It grows out of responsibility and out of transformation. Now, I want to take a couple of minutes and talk about what self-forgiveness is not. Because I mentioned right at the very beginning that one of the reasons I don't like the phrase self-forgiveness is because I think most people misunderstand it. And so, to be clear, forgiving yourself is not forgetting. We have caused harm. We've caused pain. We've lied. Perhaps we've stolen. We've broken promises. We've hurt people in many ways. And it doesn't mean that we push all that aside and act like it didn't happen. It doesn't mean forgetting. Forgiving yourself does not mean erasing consequences. In my active addiction, I caused real harm to multiple people. And I faced consequences because of that. I've shared in the past. My addiction resulted in my arrest. And it resulted in my going to prison for 2 years. Did I deserve that? I probably deserved more. There are consequences, and there are consequences I carry with me today. There are consequences because I'm a convicted felon. There are consequences and conditions that are still present on me today, years after being released. Consequences are real. Sometimes those consequences can mean broken relationships. Sometimes those consequences can mean that we lose a job. Sometimes those consequences can mean that we have restrictions on things we can do. Sometimes the consequences can mean divorce. In my case, one of the consequences of my behavior and my actions in active addiction is that I have a daughter that today still, and we're talking years, 15 years later, still doesn't have much to do with me. And it's because I caused tremendous harm and pain for her. And I did that. And that has caused consequences in my life. Forgiving yourself doesn't mean minimizing the past. It doesn't mean telling yourself, well, it wasn't really a big deal. Because a lot of times it was a big deal to somebody. It doesn't mean pretending that what we did wasn't harmful. It doesn't mean, and this is a big one, it doesn't mean automatic trust restoration. You know, for some of us, we expect people to step right back up and to trust us and to believe us, to trust us, to not question whether we're telling the truth or not. But maybe for years we've been lying and we've been causing harm. And it's not reasonable for us to expect that trust to be restored quickly. If we've been lying for years, it may be years before that trust is restored. And it doesn't mean forgiving myself, doesn't mean demanding that others forgive me on my timeline. It doesn't mean that I can demand that others forgive me at all. I may have caused harm and damage in ways that I never experienced forgiveness from others. But I have to practice self-forgiveness and step away from that shame. And here's a couple things you need to hear and you need to understand. You can forgive yourself and still live with consequences. Maybe things that you've done cost you a divorce. Maybe, like in my case, they've cost a family member or a child or somebody that was extremely important to you to stop interacting with you. Consequences are real. We can forgive ourselves and still acknowledge the hurt that we've caused. Because remember, again, what self-forgiveness is talking about is stepping away from the shame, stepping away from that belief that I'm screwed up, that I'm broken, that I can't change, and that things will never be better. I can change. You can change. We step out of that shame, and we can forgive ourselves and still give others the space that they need to heal. It's been 15, 16 years since I got out of prison. And there are people that, when I went to prison, cut off all contact with me. There are people that whenever I got out of prison, didn't have anything to do with me. And there are people that today, all these years later, still want nothing to do with me. But there are others that, because they've been able to see the change in my life over time, over an extended period, they're now a part of my life again. They're back in the picture. And that can happen. But it means that we give them the space that they need to heal. So a part of this process is rebuilding identity. And my question for you is, who are you becoming? Who are you becoming? Shame keeps us tied to an old identity. Shame keeps us tied to the worst version of ourselves. Shame tells us we can never move past that. We can never change. Things are never going to be better. Shame keeps me tied to that identity from the past. But recovery invites me to ask a new question. And that question is, who am I becoming? It assumes that change is possible. And change is possible. We don't heal by staring at who we used to be. Now, let me say with that, I need to remember who I used to be. I need to remember the harm. In fact, for me to be able to look back and remember the harm that I caused and the damage that I caused has become a motivation for me to continue to press forward. There's somebody I know. She may end up watching this video. I doubt she'll be here tonight, but she may end up watching the video later. Sometimes she does. But every year on her sobriety date, she posts a picture from a number of years ago when she was arrested. It's a mugshot. And she posts a picture side by side, that mugshot, with a current picture of herself. A contrast, an example of who she used to be and who she is today. And that's a healthy comparison. That's the kind of comparison that I'm talking about that I have. I remember the harm that I used to cause, the life that I used to live. But I don't stare at that and continue to live as that person. That serves as a motivation for me to move forward and to continue to grow, to continue to heal. We heal by building a life that reflects who we're choosing to be now, today, currently. Again, who are you choosing to be? Who are you choosing to become? And I want to say, I talk a lot about daily check-ins, and I'm going to bring it up again. This is why a daily check-in is so important. I use 4 questions. What are you feeling? What are you thinking? What are you doing? Which includes, where have you been today? Who have you been around? And then the 4th question, what are you thinking of doing? These 4 questions keep me honest with myself. They keep me present in what I'm experiencing right now, today. And they keep me aware of where I've been and of where I'm heading. A daily check-in. They keep me living today instead of drowning in yesterday and in the past. So let's look for a minute at some practical tools for moving out of shame. I'm going to put out a few tools that can help break that shame cycle. The first tool that I want to talk about for a minute is something called the 90-second rule for overwhelming feelings. Research shows that when we get hit with a feeling, when we get hit with an urge, when we get hit with a feeling of loneliness or anger or shame or guilt or sadness, when we get hit with a feeling, research says that if we can stop, take a breath, begin to calm ourselves, that within 90 seconds, that feeling will begin to subside. But that takes an action on our part. It takes us pausing to take a breath. It takes us closing our eyes, beginning to calm ourselves, refocus. If we can hold on for 90 seconds instead of giving way to that feeling, to that emotion, then we will be able to move forward successfully. The 90-second rule for overcoming feelings. A second tool we can use. Some of you that are here regularly use this tool already, and that's journal the truth without judgment. Daily journaling is an important part of recovery, and I got to tell you, it's a tool that I resisted for a long time, but it's a tool that's become so important to me in my day-to-day recovery. I journal the truth without judgment. I journal about my day, what I've experienced, what I've done. Those 4 questions, what am I feeling, thinking, doing, thinking of doing? And I write facts. I don't write explanations. I don't make excuses. I write, here's where I've been successful today. Here's where I've struggled. And I own my behaviors. Journal truth without judgment. And I don't beat myself up when I struggle. When I recognize that I've struggled, I ask myself, what could I have done differently? What could I have done better? Another tool that can be important for us is reading and recovery focused learning. What we feed our minds shapes our future. I'm always reading a book. I listen to podcasts. I talk with other people to find out what they're learning. I've attended 12-step studies. I just have completed, I'm looking and I don't see it. I know it's here somewhere. I don't see it. I've just completed a book study with a group of guys. I just completed a book study that was on unwanted sexual behavior, unhealthy sexual behavior. And I did a book study. We read the book together, a chapter each week. And then we reported into each other what had stood out to us and what we took away from that chapter. It was good for me. It kept me on track to get the reading done and to dig in and pay attention to what I was reading. And, it was amazing. There were several of us doing the study together, and I would hear other people check in what stood out to them. And a lot of times there were things that stood out to them that I didn't even connect with. And I had to go back and say, oh, it did say that. And that does pertain to me. So reading and recovery focused learning. Feed your mind good things. Another one that I would say is an absolute must is healthy community. We heal in connection, not in isolation. Isolation is never a healthy response to anything. Isolation is motivated by shame and by fear. And again, shame is never healthy. It's never healthy. And it never produces change in our life. And then spiritual practices. Is faith a part of your life? If faith is a part of your life, then I would encourage you to ask God for the very thing that shame tells you you don't deserve, and that's grace and transformation. Ask God. If faith is a part of your life, ask God for grace and for transformation. He'll give those things to you freely. All right. I'm going to start to wrap things up some here. And let me just make a couple statements. First of all, we can't rewrite our past. I've had some big failures in my life. Now, I've had some big successes, but I've had some big failures. And there's nothing that I can do that's going to erase those failures that are in the past. I can't go back and change the fact that I spent 2 years in prison. There's not anything I can do to erase that. It's always going to be there. But here's the amazing thing. While I can't rewrite my past, I absolutely can rewrite the way my past shapes me currently. Am I going to allow my past to keep me in a rut where I continue to repeat the same behaviors? Or am I going to allow my past to be a motivation that encourages me and pushes me forward in recovery and in progress and towards becoming that person that I want to be? Self-forgiveness is not a free pass to escape from everything. It's not an excuse for anything. And self-forgiveness is absolutely not avoiding responsibility. Self-forgiveness is stepping out of shame so that we can finally take responsibility and grow. Become that new person that we want to be. Now, if tonight's conversation has helped you at all, I'd ask you to please share this live. Of course, it'll be a recording when you share it. But share this with somebody that needs hope and that needs clarity. Again, this will be posted on my Facebook feed for the next 30 days. By tomorrow, it'll be posted on my YouTube channel at RW Coaching. If you'd like support, coaching, or help building your recovery plan, you can always reach me at rwcoaching2@gmail.com. And I want to ask you one last thing before we go. What's one thing that you're going to take away from tonight's event? Even if you've sat here the entire time, watched this entire video, if there's not something that you've grasped that you can take away, then you've wasted an hour. What are you going to take away from tonight's event with you when you go? If you're not doing it yet, feel free to follow me here on Facebook. Next week, we'll be back, same time, Tuesday evening, 8 p.m., with a new topic, a new discussion. And coming up in January, we'll go back to having a live guest each month. And I know you guys are looking forward to that. You'd much rather hear somebody else on here with me talking than just listen to me ramble on for an hour. I want to invite you to every Wednesday, a blog comes out. Sometimes those blogs are connected to what we've talked about here. Sometimes they're on a different topic, but those blogs are posted on my website, rw-coaching.com, or you can find those on Substack, Ron Williams. I'd invite you to check those out. You can subscribe to those and get that blog in your email every Wednesday. And again, thanks for being here tonight. Thanks for sharing, for following. And I'll see you guys next week.